Hey, I'm firearms attorney Gilbert Ambler, and I'm back right now to talk about some very exciting news, which is the opportunity gun owners have right now to reclaim some of the rights that have been lost over the past 100 years or so. And of course, I'm talking about the potential removal of silencers or suppressors, as we in the industry would call them, from the National Firearms Act, including not only removing the taxing requirements, but also removing the onerous registration requirements. In addition to that, I want to talk about where this process is right now because we're past the House. We're now looking at the Senate. And I want to talk about what you can do to help this cause move forwards. And finally, I want to talk about what you can do, even if you live in an anti-gun state where your senators, for example, might not otherwise support gun rights, why they might still have some valid reasons to support this bill as it moves forwards. Before we dive into this, however, if you have not yet hit that subscribe button, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe, like, comment with your thoughts, and share with your friends. That way you and your friends can keep getting this important Second Amendment related content. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you are aware that there is a political effort right now as part of Trump's big, beautiful bill to remove not only silencers, but also short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns from the National Firearms Act. And there's a couple trajectories on how this could go. Right now, what the House has passed is a bill that removes not only the registration requirements for silencers, but also the tax. They have passed a backup provision that leaves in place the registration requirements and removes the $200 tax. We're going to talk about why they're doing that and why they're forward thinking and looking at the Senate to do that. And the reason that they've done it that way is because there are some concerns that in the Senate, there are those in the Senate who might not think it's appropriate to remove the registration requirements for a reconciliation process. The significance of the reconciliation process is that the bill does not have to be filibuster proof. It only needs to be a simple majority. Now, keep in mind, right now Republicans have the Senate, but they don't have a filibuster proof Senate. So they have to worry about what they can pass with a simple majority. There is a concern there that in the reconciliation process, which avoids the supermajority that is the filibuster, it's just a regular majority, that potentially that process would not allow them to undo the registration requirements. Now, I disagree with them. I think that because it's all been tied to the tax code, they can remove the registration requirements in addition to removing the tax, dropping the tax to zero. And right now, I think we all need to be calling our senators, asking our senators not only to support the entire removal of the registration and the tax, not just from silencers, but the House took out the provision, the Short Act, which removed these requirements for short-barreled rifles and shotguns. We want the Senate to add them back in. In fact, I think it's even more important for short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns that we remove the registration requirements and remove them from the National Firearms Act, because at least with suppressors, once you have a tax stamp currently, you can take it across state lines. There's not additional restrictions. Short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, not only do we have the taxing restrictions, we have the registration restrictions, we also have the transport restrictions. And so that's even more onerous than the restrictions on suppressors. If this were to go into effect, who's it big news for? It's big news for anybody who wants to buy a silencer or a suppressor. Again, if I buy one, now I don't have to worry about others in my household. I could allow my spouse to possess it the same way she could any of my other firearms, be able to obtain it without having to get a tax stamp and go through the waiting period. And significantly, when we talk about the short-barreled rifles, of course, we remove all of those additional nasty requirements. And for gun shops, they're all going to be excited as well because they would no longer need a special operations tax or an SOT in order to sell these items, assuming this bill is passed as written, at least as it's written currently for silencers, and ideally as it could be written to include short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns. So get on the phone with your senators, tell them, demand. We all know that politicians don't always listen to what their constituents want. This is a situation where they need to hear from us and hear from us consistently. Now, a couple of other interesting points here. Congress only has the power to regulate weapons via one of two avenues. One is the power to tax. The other is the power over commerce. If they were to remove the taxing portion entirely, I think there's an interesting question as to whether there are enough ties to commerce to continue allowing, as the National Firearms Act is currently written, as it was written in 1934 and amended in 1986, are there enough commerce ties there alone that if you're not taxing silencers, you can still regulate them? That would be a question for the courts to decide, but it's certainly an interesting question to mull over, because it raises the possibility that even if the only thing that they accomplish is removing the tax, that there might still be an attack on the legitimacy of the registration requirements for silencers if the nexus is not sufficient to tie them to commerce. Because again, that's the only other way that Congress has power over them. The final thing that I think is really important right now is, even if you live in a state where your senators or your representatives are traditionally anti-gun, they might still have a valid reason to want to see short-barreled rifles and suppressors removed from the NFA. And this is, as long as they remain in the NFA, they line up a judicial challenge. Because keep in mind, every year more people buy suppressors and buy short-barreled rifles, and the more of them that people buy and employ in their home defense plans and as part of their defensive weapons, the stronger the argument is that they are in common use for a lawful purpose and protected by the Second Amendment. Now, I know that there's been some bad decisions from places like even the Fifth Circuit saying suppressors are not arms, but I don't think that decision is likely to stand. I think that it is very likely that if we continue down this road with more and more people buying silencers or suppressors and short-barreled rifles, that eventually there may be a judge who decides it is unconstitutional to restrict them. And if we get there judicially, there is a chance that the entire NFA could be struck down as unconstitutional. So for that reason, I think even an anti-gun politician should want to legislatively fix this. That way they avoid for themselves on the anti-gun side the risk that a court later steps in and judicially fixes this. If you enjoyed this content, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, and remember, keep the pressure up on your elected officials. They work for us, they work for you and me, and they need to hear from us right now.